This episode is powered by PodDecks.
On the cloud. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the G.O.A.T Talk podcast. Once again, I'm joined by Spencer, the Full Court Talk podcast. And today we're going to talk specifically about James Harden, the situation with the Rockets, and potential landing spots and trade packages for James Harden. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention one thing. Spencer's the first person to make a repeat appearance on the show. So there's that. It was such a short turnaround, but Spencer's the first person to make a repeat appearance on the show. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem, man.
And then, of course, before we get started, how are you? It's been all of like a few days since the last time we spoke. I don't think much has changed, but
I've been good. Warriors got whooped.
Yeah,
so that was fun. Yeah. How about you?
I've been good. I mean, this James Harden thing has been crazy to say the least. It's like every day there's something new. I enjoyed opening night. I enjoyed the first 2 days of games. Now it's been, KD's looking great right now. It's only been one game, and so it's only been one game, but in one game, he looked phenomenal. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they're looking good in Boston. Again, it's only one game, so everything you got to take with a grain of salt. They're looking good in Boston. I do have a little bit of concern about the Bucks. Giannis, Drew Holiday, and Chris Middleton combined for 87 points. The Bucks as a team out-rebounded the Celtics about like 15, and it still wasn't enough to get the win. Granted, it was a buzzer beater, but still, it wasn't enough to get the win. So I do have a little bit of concerns there. So before we jump into James Harden, I do want to ask, are you, because the Lakers lost opening night, which was ring night, for them to the Clippers. And I expected there to be a slow start for the Lakers. I mean, when you look at LeBron-led teams, they typically do have slow starts. And what you tend to see with teams led by LeBron is from the time the season starts, which is usually around, late September, early October, somewhere around there, until Christmas is really when it's the feeling out process of how is LeBron going to lead this team. I mean, we saw it last year with the addition of AD. We saw it the year before, which was his first year in LA, and we've seen it a lot over the course of his career. So I'm not surprised that they're going to. I expect him to be off to a slow start. I expect that when you're talking about LeBron James, you have to measure anything he does based on his postseason play. Now, with this 72-game season, should they miss the playoffs, which I don't think anyone is expecting them to, it's not really a question. But I'm not at all concerned about the slow start. Is there anything specific? I mean, obviously, like you said, you're a Warriors fan. Warriors got obliterated by the Nets opening night. Is there anything from opening night that you're drawing to and just like that really stuck out to you?
Giannis and how he missed the second free throw to force the game to OT. And it kind of just I did a podcast 2 weeks ago where I said that Giannis was one of the most overrated players. And
Absolutely.
I know you agree with that. And it's because you can't play with him, or you can't play him in the final minutes of a game.
Right.
Or in the final play of a game. He's not going to be able to, if he gets fouled, he's not going to be able to hit those shots consistently, right? And if you put him when you're down by 3, you can't make him a decoy or anything like that because he's not a consistent shooter. So it kind of just proved my point that you can't play him in late game situations.
I mean, I agree with you 100%. Like you said, when you're looking at MVP caliber players or former MVP, you're looking at Steph Curry, you're looking at LeBron James, you're looking at Anthony, who's on the up and up in terms of being an MVP player. You're looking at Kevin Durant, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, all these guys who in late game situations, they elevate, they rise to the occasion. And we've seen constantly Giannis doesn't do that. I mean, the Bucks for 2 years now, for the last 2 years now, have had the best record in the NBA in the regular season and have completely disappeared in the playoffs. Now, I don't know how much of that, how much of that blame belongs to Giannis. I think some of the blame needs to start going into Mike Budenholzer. He has such a terrible last name. Budenholzer's direction. Yeah. Now, granted, Budenholzer, he's an amazing coach, 2-time coach of the year. I mean, he's been a coach for 7 years. 6 of those 7 years, he's led a team to the playoffs. 3 years with the Hawks, and now the last 3 years with Milwaukee. So it's not that he's a bad coach, but when you have Giannis now locked up for 5 years, you're going to have to start looking at, Mike Budenholzer. Is he the coach that's going to be able to take this team over the hump and get them, into the finals? Now, just one more thing I do want to say is with everything that's going on, I do want to ask, is the pressure on Giannis this season to get the Bucks to the finals, or is the pressure on the Bucks to get the Bucks to the finals?
Well, I think it's more on Giannis because the Bucks took off all their pressure by signing him 5 years. They have no more pressure because they did what they set out to do. And now Giannis needs to prove that he's going to be worth that contract, right? He's a 2-time MVP, but he needs to prove that he can lead the team. We've seen the Steph Currys do it before the stars got there, right? We've seen James Harden lead his team to amazing seasons, even though he wasn't able to finish it, but he was still able to compete. Every year, Giannis just falls short.
Yep.
And it's because Giannis doesn't have the skill set to get him further in the playoffs. He can't just run inside and dunk the ball. Like in the playoffs, it's a different animal. Teams are going to adjust to your play, and that's why his play drops significantly during the playoffs.
Absolutely. And again, we can sit and we can be honest all day long. I think that'd be a completely different show in and of itself, just with how all the layers to that situation out there in Milwaukee. But I do want to now switch gears over to James Harden in Houston. I mean, obviously, every day there's something new coming out of Houston with this James Harden thing. James Harden's now being forced to kind of like a 4-day mini quarantine, and then continue to test negative for the coronavirus before being able to rejoin the team. It was revealed that the reason why James Harden was late to the bubble last season was, and it's crazy to say last season, it was like 2 months ago, but the reason why James Harden was late to the bubble was because he did have the coronavirus at the time, and that's why he was late. So when you're unwrapping all these layers, it is obvious that Houston needs to get James Harden out of there sooner rather than later. Whether you want to argue it's because of trade value, whether you want to argue it's because of just a bad locker room vibe, whatever the case is, James Harden can't be in Houston any longer. I do think one of the issues with that is because James Harden didn't pick up his option, it makes it difficult to trade him because it's like wherever you send him, the chances are he's not going to want to stay there once the contract is up. So that's an issue as well. And people don't really like to talk about it, but money does mean a lot when it comes to the NBA. Money and length of contract means a lot, especially when you're looking at trades. So there's like 4 or 5 teams that are, has been thrown around as potential landing spots. The Heat was a potential landing spot. It was reported a few days ago that the Heat are no longer interested. Bucks was a potential place that he could go. I don't think anything materialized there. So there's about 4 or 5 teams that Bleacher Report thinks could potentially land James Harden if Houston thinks the price is right. And so we'll start with the team that was really leading the charge from the beginning when James Harden first announced he won out, and that's the Philadelphia 76ers. Obviously, you've got, Daryl Morey, who was, obviously in the Rockets front office, just last year. So there's a connection there. You got Doc Rivers, who's a championship coach. Didn't have that good of a time in LA, but with this new team in Philly, we expect 100% that Philly is going to be there, fighting for potentially representing the East in the finals. So as it stands right now, I think the best trade to offer, as Bleacher Report highlights, for the 76ers would be Ben Simmons, Terrence Ferguson, a first-round pick in 2021, and a first-round pick in 2023. Now, as always with picks, it's always tough to gauge whether that's a good thing or a bad thing because you never know who that player is going to be and then how that player turns out as the season progresses. But just looking at this trade package, do you think that this is something that the Rockets will look at? And obviously we'd have to wait to get to, the others as well. But just looking at this one, do you think that this is something that the Rockets will look at and say, hey, this is something where we're getting enough back for we're getting enough in return for what we're giving away?
Well, the thing I've heard that, I read the other day, the Rockets aren't getting any offers right now for James Harden.
Right.
And supposedly they're not even getting first-round picks for him. They're getting straight-up players.
Yeah.
And if someone was to offer me this trade for James Harden, I'd take it in a heartbeat if they're offering picks as well. especially because Ben Simmons is locked up for what, 4 years, I believe.
4 years, yeah, 4.
He is on a very team-friendly star contract. He's only getting paid about $23 million, and that's a good deal. He's 24, 25 years old. He's a good player, really good on both ends. And you're still getting a guy like Terrence Ferguson, really bouncy, streaky shooter. But if it meant getting James Harden out of Houston, I would do it. James Harden has become super toxic, and he's tanking his own value for whatever reason. But it looks like he's making it harder for him to trade himself by all these antics. And as a Houston fan, I guarantee you're frustrated.
Well, I mean, it's difficult. It plays both ways. I'll say this: I think it is frustrating. And I think the reason why it's frustrating is because the fact of the matter is, if there isn't a deal that's reached before the trade deadline, not only do we have to deal, and I don't want to say have to deal with James Harden because he's done so much for the Houston franchise while he's been there, but you have to deal with this behavior for the rest of the season. Number one, number two, you have to deal with this behavior for all of next season until the trade deadline, and then after, if it trade, like the thing with James Harden is there's still 2 years left on his deal.
Yeah.
And if a trade isn't reached this season, we have to still deal with all of this off-court behavior for the rest of this season. And then again, the speculation is, will he get traded? And then if he's not traded, we have to deal with it again all of next season. So it's really difficult from that standpoint. The other thing I will say too is James Harden is like an ultimate professional. I mean, when you talk about like people who are like top tier, like high class, like ultimately professionals, like you don't really see them getting in trouble a lot. James Harden is on that list of guys. LeBron is on that list of players. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, all those guys. So he falls in that list, and I think it's very apparently to the all other 29 teams in the league, whether they're interested in James Harden or not. It is obviously very apparent that he's only doing this because he wants out of Houston.
Yeah.
Like, James Harden is not one of those guys where this is, constantly a thing year in and year out. And I think because of that, you have to take this behavior as an isolated incident of, okay, he doesn't really act like this. He's only doing this because he wants out. Now, the issue is, should he want out of wherever he ends up, there's no guarantee that he won't also repeat this behavior. And I think that is something that general managers and owners are looking at in terms of that aspect. And okay, he gets here, but now let's say he's unhappy. Now he wants out of here. Will he do the same thing? And the question, honestly, is we don't know, but it's very possible. The other thing too, I will say about this as we continue is this behavior recently of James Harden reminded me a lot of Terrell Owens when he wanted out. He did very similar things. He created scenes off the court. He created scenes in practice. I'm sorry, off the field. He created scenes in practice to force his way out. And I think that's what we're looking at here. The other thing too, I will say is, and something that was brought up on an episode of First Kick, and I didn't think about it until this morning. You see oftentimes in football, like with Ezekiel Elliott, and guys like that, where they're not getting their money, or if they want out, they will either hold out or they will sit out. I think it is very possible that should James Harden not get traded, he will sit out. I think that is something that he will look at as a potential possibility, and I think that opens Pandora's box in the NBA. Because you remember when you look at LeBron James and his decision back when he decided to join the Heat, that in and of itself opened Pandora's box in a way of like players' power in terms of they can do what they want, right? But before LeBron James, you didn't really have a top guy willingly leave the team he was on to go somewhere else. I mean, you've had top guys switch teams all the time, but that was really more like in trade packages towards the end of their career. It was rare to see a top guy leave the team he was on. And so with that opened Pandora's box in terms of, okay, you got guys like Kevin Durant leaving OKC to join the Warriors, just an example. I think we get in a situation where James Harden decides to sit out this season. That opens Pandora's box as well. Where other guys, not even on his level, but like people below him, I don't know, just throw a name out there, like a Devontae Graham or something, could be like, you know what, James Harden did it. So you know what, if James Harden can get away with it, I'm going to do it too. Something like that. And I think that is a place that it's a very real possibility. But I mean, it's always difficult when you're talking about trading top guys. Like you never really talk about an MVP, a former MVP getting traded. That's not something that's something that really happens. And I think that's the other thing too. It's like, You got a guy who is arguably one of, if not the most prolific scorer in NBA history, and we're losing that. And I think, like I said in the last show we did, I don't care where James Harden wants to go. I don't care if he wants to go to Brooklyn. I don't care if he wants to go to Philadelphia. I don't care if he wants to go to Charlotte. Like, it is in the best interest of the Rockets to not give James Harden what he wants, but to send James Harden somewhere where we can still continue to be a contending team, because we've been contenders. We just haven't been able to get over the hump. We still, I think maintaining that status is ultimately important. I don't care where James Harden goes. You look at San Antonio, with Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi Leonard wanted to be in LA. San Antonio didn't send Kawhi to LA. They sent him to Toronto because that is what was best for them as a franchise, as a team moving forward. And I think that is the approach that we need to take. I don't care where he goes. He can go to Chicago for all I care. If Chicago is going to offer us the best trade package for James Harden, then that's where I want James Harden to go. And good for Chicago fans if they can get a guy like James Harden.
Yeah.
We haven't had a guy like, a guy of that stature since MJ. So if that were to happen, that'd be great. So from the 76ers, we go to the Nets, who was another team that was rumored to want James Harden. And when you look at the Nets, I think they have the best ability to offer the best trade package. I just don't think they should. And we can talk about that in a second. But Karis LeVert, Spencer Dinwiddie, Taurean Prince, a 21 first rounder, a 23 first rounder, and a 25 first rounder. So that is the most extensive package, I would say, that a contending team can offer. The only thing about the Nets is, I think, and I don't know, I tend not to agree with Max Kellerman when he's talking, because I think he's a fool at times. But Max Kellerman said on First Take, I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before, he said that if the Rockets trade the Nets, if the Nets trade for James Harden, then the Nets would get worse. And at first I'm like, no, there's no way you can trade for an MVP caliber player and get worse. But after I thought about it, I'm like, actually, it makes sense, because James Harden's a ball stopper. You saw, again, it was only one game, but you saw in that game against the Warriors, they like to move the ball in Brooklyn. The chemistry is there 100%. It's not, where you would like for it to be, but obviously, again, it's only the first game. It's KD's first game back, Kyrie's first game back. So obviously, you've got chemistry things to work out. You don't trade away a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie. You don't trade away a guy like Karis LeVert. You are jeopardizing the depth of your team, which I think the Nets are the deepest team in the league right after.
Yeah.
It would be good for James Harden. I mean, he could be a contender in the East. It'd be a guaranteed trip to the finals for James Harden, because the East, as competitive as it is, you have James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant on the same team. I don't care about how long it takes for the ball to get shot. There's no way you're telling me that those three guys don't lead the Nets to the finals. But yeah, I just don't think that would be a smart move on the end of the Nets. I mean, for the Rockets, that'd be great, getting a guy like Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, Taurean Prince, and again those picks. But for the Nets, I don't think that's something the Nets would look at and say, the Nets don't need James Harden right now. I don't think jeopardize their future to trade for James Harden.
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard, Kyrie doesn't want James Harden, and I don't know if that was true or not. That was just reported. And I could really see that, because he would be the one getting the short end of the stick, right? He would be the one that takes less shots. KD is not going to give up less shots.
Yeah.
James Harden is not going to give up less shots. They're both MVPs. Kyrie is the one that's going to be like kind of the third wheel, I guess. And like you said, the Nets played beautiful basketball on opening night, and that was just their first game of the season. And I'm assuming it's just going to get better and better from here. Karis LeVert had a great game, even though he was like, I think 6 or 17, but he still got to the free throw line. He was active. And Spencer Dinwiddie is a guy you can always count on. So keeping two guys like that is super important. And Taurean Prince, as bad as he's been over the past couple of years, he kind of fits that team really nicely. He's a Swiss Army knife on defense, and offensively, he's going to be able to give you a couple threes here and there. But and those picks, they're going to be super important down the line. It's never good to jeopardize your future for a guy like James Harden, because you don't know how he's going to react to having two other superstars. He's never had two superstars before. So if I was them, I would keep the bench depth and the depth as a whole. Because Karis LeVert, I guarantee, is going to be starting before the end of the season.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, Karis LeVert is a guy that, if, like on most teams in the NBA, is a starter. And on some of those teams is the guy that you're building your team around. So Karis LeVert's ceiling is really high. Like you said, he was 6 of 17 from the field, but really active. He's a guy that, again, doesn't need the ball in his hands to get his shot, which in today's NBA is like crucial when you're talking about just the volume of threes that are being taken in the league right now relative to just a few years ago. The other thing I will say too about Taurean Prince is you're right. He hasn't had a good, his last few seasons, he hasn't been great. But he is that Swiss Army knife. He reminds me a lot of like a Jay Crowder.
Exactly.
He is that Swiss Army knife on defense. He might not, he's not going to be the best defender on your team, and he might not be able to lock down the best guy on the other team, but he can at least get that other guy thinking on the other end. In that regard, defensively, he also, very similar to a TJ Warren type of guy where if he's on, he's on. If he's not, he's not. But again, like you said, mortgaging your future. I think we're seeing with the Clippers right now as we speak. You don't mortgage your future for a star, and you don't know how it's going to turn out. I think the difference with the Clippers is they only have 2 stars. The Nets already have 2 stars, and that would be getting a third. And James Harden has proven over the years he doesn't work well with no matter what the off-court chemistry is like. On the floor, James Harden wants the ball in his hands. He wants to be the guy. KD ain't gonna let that go because that's Kevin Durant's team. Kyrie, to an extent, isn't gonna let that go either because, like you said, he'd be getting the short end of the stick if James Harden decides to come out to Brooklyn and play out there. So I don't know. I think in all likelihood, again, we won't see that happen. I think between the two, as it stands right now, I think it's more likely that he gets sent to Philadelphia. Even though that's where he wants to go, I think Philadelphia at the moment, offers the best package for him as it stands right now. But again, like we said at the top, no team is really offering for James Harden right now. And I think that's really because they're going to wait until the trade deadline to see what he looks like, because you have to remember you can act a fool off the court. Teams still want you to, even though in this situation you can act a fool off the court, but teams still want you to perform on the court, and they still want to see that guy that averaged over 30 last season. If they're not going to get that, I don't think there's going to be a trade package for James Harden from the deadline. Another team, and I thought it was really interesting that no one really mentioned it in the beginning, and I think it's maybe just because James doesn't want to go here, is the Knicks. And with the Knicks, you'd get R.J. Barrett, Julius Randle, and a slew of picks, a first rounder in 21, a first rounder in 23, a first rounder in 25, and 2 second-round picks. Again, the issue with this one is all the picks. Granted, there's a lot of them, and you can take those picks and you can flip them for other players down the line, or you could keep them. You can draft them and see what's going on. The guarantee with the Knicks is, even though they're on the up and up, they're still going to be in the lottery at least 2025. So you've got 3 lottery picks coming from the Knicks. So there's that you can fall back on. Julius Randle, he's a solid player. Another one of those Swift Army knife type guys. He has been on the decline recently, but he's still one of those Swift Army knives. RJ Barrett, I just need to see consistency out of RJ Barrett to even consider including him in a trade package for James Harden. And I think like he played the other night and he was like killing it. He was like 8 of 8, phenomenal. 3 of 3 from D. Like he was killing it. And then there's like other nights where he's like ice cold, not hitting a shot. And so you can't. RJ Barrett, he is young. Obviously, this will only be his second year in the league, but you got to have that consistency on a team like the Rockets who's looking to contend for a championship. Regardless of who you are, regardless of how long you've been in the league, you got to have some type of consistency. Even if you're consistently bad, like that's a good thing in a way because we just won't put you on the court. But like you can't have your games when you're good and then have your games when you're bad. That's just not good for the overall flow of the team. But I mean, again, if the Rockets look at this deal and say, you know what, we've got a lot of picks coming forward, I think that's something. That's all. If the front office looks at that and say, we could do some of those picks, whether it's take those picks and draft them or take those picks and try to flip them for other players. I think the Knicks is a team that the Knicks are always going to be looking for a guy like James Harden. Yeah. The Knicks are never not going to want James Harden. It doesn't matter who they have to give up. The Knicks are never going to not want James Harden. I think should a team make an offer at the trade deadline, I think the Knicks is probably going to be one of the teams you're looking at that'll probably make a trade offer. And I think it's a team that, if no one else is making a trade offer, I think it's a team that, based on what we're looking at right here, I think it's a team that would most likely land James Harden in that situation.
Yeah, I think with the Knicks, it's just like, for the Rockets to get someone like RJ Barrett is like, he's not a consistent shooter. We've seen that. And when you have a point guard like John Wall, you need a lot of consistent shooters around him. He's not a consistent 3-ball guy. And Julius Randle, I think in his short time in New York, he's developed some really bad habits. He plays a lot of hero ball, which he never did. And he kind of just like, we've seen the plays where he's in the post and he won't pass out. Even if he's doubled, he'll just take the shot. And he's developed that while being in New York. And it's a really bad look for him. And I think as good as the picks are going to be, I still wouldn't take it just because the Knicks they've failed to develop talent, right?
Yeah.
Houston hasn't shown that they're good at developing talent either.
That is true.
Right?
That is true.
And so why would you trade for an undeveloped guy like RJ Barrett and try to develop him further when you haven't been able to develop other players?
Yeah, that is a good point. I think one of the things when you look at this last 8-year stretch for the Rockets, it's really iffy. I think a lot of this has to do this first season, playoffs or not, is going to not count in my eyes. And the reason why I say this is because this new front office, this new head coach, they're going to have to undo what Mike D'Antoni did, which was implement small ball, which clearly doesn't work when you're in a conference with a team like the Mavericks, who's got a 6'6" shooting guard, a 6'8" point guard. You got Porzingis, who's 7'3". You got Maxi Kleber, who's 7 feet as well. You don't play small ball against a team like the Mavericks and just like, you know what, we're not going to rebound. We're just going to trade 3s for 2s. Like, no, you don't. That's not going to win you anything. In a conference like with Nikola Jokic, who in my opinion is the best. I mean, he's not, it's positionless basketball, but he is listed as a center. He's the best center in the league, in my opinion. In a conference like with LeBron James and Anthony Davis, who LeBron James is the best player in the world, Anthony Davis the best big in the league as of right now. You don't just send out guys without a single guy going over 6'8" and expect that to be winning basketball when you've got nothing but trees in your conference. I don't think that's smart. Yeah. I think this season is going to be difficult in terms of undoing all that. I don't know much about Stephen Silas, honestly. I didn't even know he was a candidate for the job until he got the job. Taking nothing away from him, I mean, he's been an assistant coach for like 20 years, I think. So he's got the resume. He was in Dallas last season. I expect him to do good things with this team. I just, like you said, developing talent is not something that we've been good at. I mean, you could point to James Harden, but we didn't draft James Harden. We traded for James Harden.
He was pretty much set in his ways before he got to Houston.
He just developed because now he's the only guy on the team, and this is how he chooses to play that. So we didn't really develop James Harden at all. I do like your point, though. I would say, and I don't know how willing the Knicks would be to do this. I mean, you got James Dolan, who's really stubborn. The entire front office for the Knicks is really stubborn. We don't have a center right now, or at least a quality center. I think it is. I would like it. I would like this trade better if it is Mitchell Robinson and the picks. I think if we can convince the Knicks to give up Mitchell Robinson and the picks for James Harden, it'd be weird to do that. I just think, like I said, when you don't really have a center, the picks, you can always flip them because we're not good at developing talent. So you can always take those picks and send them elsewhere. We've seen the Thunder do it for the last 2 years now, and they've got a litany of picks for the next 2 years. If they use them to draft or they use them to trade, the Thunder are going to be set through, I think it's like 2028. So
yeah,
they've
something
got
like that.
Right, they've got they've got at least 6 to 8 years of just future in store for them. So, I mean, in that regard, it's there's hope in terms of being able to. We see in the Thunder get picks, and then flip them for players. I think it's maybe something that the Rockets should look at in terms of a route, but I don't know. I think maybe obviously I think Mitchell Robinson is the cornerstone of that Knicks franchise. Then again, I've said this several times in the past. Being the best player on the Knicks is like being the tallest person in a little man's contest. It doesn't hold much weight because the Knicks suck. And you don't get anything for being the best player on the Knicks other than being the best player on the, like, there's no cachet with that because they're not good.
Yeah.
This isn't like back in like the Patrick Ewing days, like you're the best player and you're also a championship contender. Like, no, you're just the best player on a terrible team. You're just wasting your time.
Well, and you have to remember that Mitchell Robinson's on his contract here, I believe.
Yeah, he is.
So they're gonna, if they were to trade for him, they'd have to pay him big time because even though his numbers aren't like crazy, he still shot like 70% from the field last year.
That is true.
And
that's true.
He has the potential to be something really special.
Yeah.
So I think he'd probably get something like a max.
Yeah. Yeah, that is true. He'd get a max from the Knicks. I don't think if we're entertaining the idea of him possibly getting traded to the Rockets, I don't think he'd get a max from the Rockets simply because he's not one of those guys like a LeBron or AD or a KD where it's like,
yeah,
no matter whose uniform he has, he is the best player on your team. And I think because of that, I think it's possible that like if Mitchell Robinson's not on the Knicks, he'd get a max from a team like Charlotte, a team like Cleveland, like a team that's like trying to be on the up and up, not an established, not like an established like juggernaut force in the league like Houston or Golden State or something like that. And I think in that regard, I wouldn't be shocked if a team like that gave him a max. The thing too is if you're moving James Harden, you have the space to give a guy like Mitchell Robinson the max. I just don't think right? Because I think it's like the league is the NBA is very much what have you done for me lately? I think the Rockets are going to look at him and say you're a solid player, but until you do that with us, we're not even going to have a discussion about a max contract. And I think that goes for any team that's an established team, whether he stays in the Knicks or he leaves or not. I mean, the Knicks obviously are going to give him to him because, like I said, he's the best player on the team. But the other team to give him a max, it'd be like a team like the Pistons, the Hornets. You're looking at like the Cavs, the Bulls, teams like that.
Yeah,
so, But I mean, your point is taken. He's coming up on his contract, so that would play a big role in that if he were to be involved. I think that's something the Rockets look at though and say, let's try to do it. We're giving away the best scorer of all time in most guys' books. Give us Mitchell Robinson and the picks, and you can have them. And that's good for the future of the Rockets. And I think if Daryl Morey is in the front office, I think that's something Daryl Morey can pull off. I don't know if the front office as is right now could pull that off, but then again, you never know what they can do in Houston because there's always something, whether it's good or bad. There's always a surprise coming out of Houston, like every month, and so you never know what they can do. The only Western Conference team that is really a viable option, I think, is the Nuggets. The Nuggets could potentially offer Gary Harris, Will Barton, Michael Porter Jr., a first rounder in 2021 and 2025. I don't like this trade at all. I don't think Will Barton is consistent enough. I don't think Michael Porter Jr. has proved enough for me where he is a consistent offensive threat and a consistent, defensive, guy that's not. He's been a liability on defense recently. He needs to change that, I think.
Yeah.
Gary Harris is another one of those guys where if he's on, he's on. If he's not, he's not. Chances are by him coming to Houston, he could get more of those on days than off days. I just don't like this pick I don't like this trade package primarily because of Michael Porter Jr. You never know what you're going to get from him. That's where I'm at with that one.
Well, the thing about Gary Harris is he's been regressing for the past 2 to 3 years now.
Yeah.
And the thing about that is, like, how are you regressing with one of the best playmakers in the NBA?
Yeah.
In Jokic, right?
Yeah.
So that's my take on him.
And a very close second with Jamal Murray.
Yeah. And then you go with Michael Porter Jr., who I've heard that the Rockets are focusing on instead of Jamal Murray. Michael Porter Jr. is really good, and I think he's going to be a really good player. But there's a reason why he didn't play for the first 2 years. Obviously, he was hurt, but he is terrible on defense. He offers no defensive upside when he doesn't. He doesn't stay motivated on that end. And I think that's the big problem with him. But offensively, the kid's gifted, right? We've seen him hit tough shots after tough shots. He's going to be a good player in the long run, but I don't think the Rockets do want him, so maybe they want to take a chance on him.
Yeah.
But his injury history, it's very apparent. We know that he has a lot of back problems, knee problems. So focusing the trade on a guy like MPJ is tough.
It is.
And we haven't even gotten to the fact that if James Harden is on the Nuggets, that takes away Jokic's best ability, which is playmaking. So why would you jeopardize your current best player for another superstar like that? I'm not too sure why you do that, especially with the Nuggets being one of the deepest teams in the NBA.
I think the other thing you have to consider about the Nuggets is Jamal Murray. I mean, what he was doing in the bubble, specifically in that series against the Clippers, is something that you knew that Jamal Murray was a guy that could reach that MVP, that all-star level in terms of being a perennial all-star.
Yeah.
And although he would probably never be in consideration for an MVP, he played like an MVP in the bubble, specifically, again, in that series against the Clippers. I mean, you looking at Game 7, you've got Kawhi Leonard and Paul George stinking up the place, and you have Jamal Murray dropping 40. I mean, you look at their series against the Jazz in the first round. You look at that series against the Jazz, like he's trading 50-point games, 45-point games with Donovan Mitchell, another bona fide star in the league right now. So you don't jeopardize that trajectory by trading for a guy like James Harden. And again, to your point, Jokic, one of the best playmakers in the league. I mean, you want to talk about the best playmakers in the league, you're looking at LeBron, obviously, Chris Paul has still got that playmaking. Luka Doncic, absolutely. Rondo, more so in the playoffs than in the regular season, but Rondo for sure. Klay Thompson, although he's not that much of a passer, he still has some of that playmaking ability in him. Trae Young, who's developing as a playmaker. Steph Curry, who has been a playmaker with the ball in his hands and without the ball in his hands since he's been in the league, really. So, I don't. I mean, and of course, Jokic is right up there with them. It's really tough to trade for a guy like James Harden when you've got a center like that. You would trade a team. You trading for James Harden is a guy that you got a guy that doesn't pass. You got a guy that's not really a shooter. You're looking at Philadelphia. Like Joel Embiid's not really a passer. He's not really a shooter, but he will take the shot and he'll make it.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of Joel Embiid. Same thing with Jokic. He is a passer. He's not really a shooter, but he will put up those shots and he will make them on a consistent enough basis for a big where you're like, okay, it's like, you're not expecting a big to shoot 40% from the field like he's Steph Curry, or from three like he's Steph Curry, but shooting around like 30, which is right around what Jokic is doing. Shooting around 35% is nothing to frown at. I mean, again, James Harden's a career 30% shooter from deep. So shooting 30% is nothing to frown at. But to your point, you can't tie Jokic's hands like that. He's best with the ball in his hands. Jamal Murray is best with the ball in his hands. So, and again, the Nuggets have quietly been one of the best teams in the league, and that they don't get a lot of credit for it, specifically because of all the things we've both mentioned. But yeah, James Harden in a Nuggets uniform would be great for the Nuggets if they didn't have Jokic.
Yeah.
To a lesser degree if they didn't have Jamal Murray. Um, and I think when you look at it from that aspect, I don't see the Nuggets ringing the phone. They can put together a quality trade package. I just don't see the Nuggets calling the Rockets for James Harden. I don't see the Nuggets answering the phone about a call to send James Harden to Denver. And I think of all the teams listed, it just wouldn't make sense. Like of all, like there are some teams where you look at it, doesn't make sense. This is a team for sure. It would not make sense for either side, honestly, if James Harden gets sent to the Nuggets.
Yeah.
The last team on there is the Warriors. I don't really know why.
I believe they already said they're done after the whole strip club thing.
I would hope so. Let's entertain the idea anyway that between now and the trade deadline they change their mind. So James Harden obviously is what the Warriors would get. In exchange, the Rockets would receive Andrew Wiggins, James Wiseman, a 21 first rounder, a 23 first rounder, and a 25 first rounder. I would imagine that the 21 first round pick would be
Minnesota's.
from Minnesota. So it'd be a quality pick. Again, this doesn't work.
Yeah.
Actually, well, here's what I'd say. I'd say it could work. I just don't see it working. The reason why I say it could work is because Steph, he moves off the ball. Klay moves off the ball. So in that regard, it works. But Steph is best with the ball in his hands. Like, we all know that. Like, the Warriors are best when the offense is running through Steph. Even if Klay is going off for 60 and 3/4, he's playing the best, but Steph's getting all the assists. Steph is the reason why Klay open 90% of the time, because Steph Curry makes you work on defense. Steph Curry runs the most. I would say right after Klay Thompson, obviously, in the league. Steph Curry runs the most in the league in terms of he passes the ball and he doesn't just stand there wait for the ball to come back. He's going to move. He's going to take you to the corner and he's going to take you to the paint, back up to the top of the key, to the other. Like, he's going to move until either he's open and gets his shot or Klay Thompson's open and gets his shot. You have to commit at least two people has to be focused on Steph Curry at all times. Whether you're playing man-to-man or whether you're playing zone, whatever you're playing, you got to pay attention to Steph Curry, especially when the ball's not in his hands. Because if you lose track of him, he's going to be open and he's going to knock it down. You know that for sure. I mean, he is one of 3 guys in the league right now that has in the gym range. The other guy wears number 11 for the Warriors. And I would say the third guy, I think you could argue right now, is Damian Lillard. I mean, the things Damian Lillard can do from the logo is insane. And to a lesser degree, Trae Young, I think he has to do it more consistently, though. But we've seen Trae Young can just as easy pull up in the logo as well.
Yeah.
But again, I think we have to see more consistent. I don't understand why the Warriors would entertain the idea of trading for James Harden. It wouldn't make sense for them schematically. It wouldn't make sense for them monetarily when you're considering that they're obviously committing money to Steph. They're obviously giving money to Klay. They're obviously going to give money to Draymond when the time is. So you don't even have the room to pay James Harden to be on your roster. And then to ultimately be on your roster and not benefit your offense. He's a prolific scorer that can average 30, no doubt, but he's not going to do anything in terms of keeping that. The Warriors have one of the most fluid offenses in the league. They're always passing, looking for the open man. They're going to keep passing until they find the open man. James Harden's not going to do that. He's going to get the ball in his hands and he's going to dance. And with 4 seconds left, he's going to heave up a shot or he's going to pass it to someone else to take a contested one. It's just not smart. I don't see the Warriors entertaining this. And like I said, if they do, it just wouldn't make sense for them to entertain it at all.
Yeah, and I think another thing is, like, James Wiseman is a guy that he can be very special. I think in his first game he was excellent. 19 and 6, hit a couple of jump shots, and although the jump shot looks a little weird, it goes in. And that's all I can ask for, like, as long as he's putting in effort, which it seems like he is, he's wowing the people in practice. That's what I want. And I don't want to James, like, I'm obviously biased towards this because I am the furthest thing from a Rockets fan. I'm a Warriors fan, so we don't get along.
Yeah.
But, James Harden's brand of basketball is best fit for a bad team. He's going to carry a bad team, and he's going to get assists by basically giving you the last 3 seconds of the shot clock.
Yeah.
And that's why he's thrived with PJ Tucker, Eric Gordon, and those guys, because they can get their shot off. But you can't just do that to a guy like Steph or Klay. Well, you could do it to Klay because Klay can get his shot off like that.
Yeah.
But the thing about James Harden that I've noticed is that he's a very stagnant offensive player. If he doesn't get the ball back, he's not gonna move. He's just gonna stand there. And on a team like the Warriors, that's a really bad fit.
Yeah.
And I just don't see the Warriors giving up 2 guys that they believe in for a guy that probably won't even buy in. Plus all those picks.
Yeah. I will say this about your point about the Warriors is, like I said, you've got the most fluid offense in the league, in my opinion. Everybody moves on the floor from 1 to 5. Steph, Klay, Draymond, whoever they line up at center, whether it's Looney or Pascal, and then obviously the 4, whether it's Wiseman, whoever's on the floor, everybody's moving, and they're moving all the time. From the time, all 24 seconds of the shot clock, even as the ball is being brought down, the Warriors offense is moving, trying to get an open shot. James Harden, when he has the ball, like you said, he'll move when he has the ball. If the ball's hit his hand, he's just going to stand in the corner. He's just going to stand on the wing. And it's not good defensively because now essentially you're playing 5-on-4 basketball at that point.
Yeah.
Because James is going to wait for the ball to get in his hands, and then once he gets it, he's just going to throw up a shot, contested or not, which sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's just not good for the Warriors. It's just not good for the Warriors' style of play. And I think because of that, I don't even understand why Bleacher Report would add the Warriors to this list. But it's Bleacher Report,
clicks.
And they do weird stuff sometimes when it comes to things like this. So I'm not surprised. I would say of the teams on here, I think, like I said, I think the 76ers makes the most sense for the Rockets. I think the 76ers makes the most sense for the 76ers. It's very rare that you get a trade nowadays where it works for both teams. Case in point would be the Rockets trade with the Wizards. It doesn't make sense to trade John Wall for Russell Westbrook when you're just getting the exact same player back, just with health issues. Nonetheless, like you mentioned, as a Rockets fan, I don't like that we've already lost Westbrook. I don't like that we're going to lose Harden. It's tough. I do have faith that we can still be a top team in the conference. I think it'll take some time to get back to the stature where we're in the conversation for championship contending teams. But I don't see why not. I don't see why we can't, still be in that conversation as one of the better teams, not only in the conference, but also in the league. I just want this James Harden thing to be over so I can wake up and get on Twitter and not have to see James Harden trending every single day. That's what I want for Christmas, and Christmas is tomorrow. That's what I want. I want to not see James Harden trending on Twitter.
Are they even playing tomorrow?
They are not. So the game that they were supposed to play today or yesterday was postponed because they didn't have 8 players.
Oh, right. They're not scheduled for Christmas.
Right.
Yeah, I forgot.
They didn't have 8. They didn't have 8 players that could play.
Yeah.
So the game against the Thunder, which would have been the season, postponed. The thing, and I know this wasn't on the list of things, but we finished the James Harden stuff. I do want to talk about this. The beauty of the bubble is that we know it works.
Yeah.
I think it is very possible that we get a similar situation this season.
I agree.
Especially when you consider the fact that should all things go to plan, we're likely going to get another lockdown at the beginning of 2021. Once all the political stuff with this country is sorted out, and I'll leave it at that. But I think I think everyone's expecting a lockdown. I would assume that the NBA is not exempt from that lockdown.
Yeah.
And I think because we saw the bubble, granted, we only saw the bubble with like 22 teams rather than 30. There's no reason to expect that the bubble can't work with 32 teams. I mean, it would take a little bit more planning. But I think the beauty of the NBA is they've got the best. I mean, I say this all the time. Adam Silver is the best commissioner in sports right now.
Yeah.
You know, whether I don't care if you're talking about Roger Goodell, who I think is probably the worst. I don't care if it's soccer, baseball, hockey, whoever. Adam Silver is the best commissioner in sports right now because of his forward thinking, because of like his ability and his willingness to plan for things that no one else would think of, right? Like Adam Silver thinks of stuff that like you would think no other like what commissioner do you know like before you even get into a pandemic type situation is already thinking about potential emergency plans if a situation should happen years prior to it actually happening.
Yeah.
Adam Silver is very forward thinking. He's the best commissioner in basketball. I could see it would take some time. I'm sure they're already working on it right now because I think everyone knows that a lockdown is inevitable at some point. I think it's possible that we get another bubble type situation, and we've seen it work. We've seen it work flawlessly with no positive tests, and it works for basketball because there's not as many people involved, right?
Yeah.
There's 15 people on a roster. There's like maybe 5 to 10 coaches, and then obviously you've got the
Medical staff.
So all together,
I would say each team brings like 30 people.
You're looking at 30 to 40 people per team.
Yeah.
Like when you do the math, that's like a little over 1,000 people in a bubble. We saw them work the bubble with a little less than 900. Yeah. Like what's an extra 100 people going to do? Like it's not. So I think it's possible. I think it'd be great to watch. I mean, we saw it work, like I said, in the summer. So that's where I think there. I forgot where I was going with that because I started talking about Adam Silver.
And how the NBA might do a bubble again.
I have no idea where I was going with. See, I can't talk about Adam Silver because when I talk about Adam Silver, I lose my train of thought. So I gotta find it. But the question I do want to ask you though is, and I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, at the top when we talk about the Lakers. Obviously, the Lakers is going to be off to a slow start. When you're looking at Anthony Davis, is Anthony Davis? Do you think if LeBron says he's done after these 2 years, whether championships or not, whether LeBron says he's done, although I think if he wins a championship this season and championship next season, he'll probably want to come back for pride and try to get that 7th one just so that he can have he's in Jordan.
Yeah.
But let's say he doesn't. Let's say he rides off into the sunset with a championship. Bronny or no Bronny the year after. Do you think the Lakers can be led by Anthony Davis back to another championship without LeBron James?
It's hard to say just because you can't look at Anthony Davis's past and be like, oh, he didn't lead a team back when he was with the Pelicans, because the Pelicans were a very bad team. They're poorly ran. Yeah. And his best piece next to him obviously was a very good player, but Drew Holiday.
Yeah.
And he had Tyreek Evans, and like the team wasn't good.
Yeah.
Ryan Anderson was the guy next to him, and Ryan Anderson plays no defense.
Absolutely.
So I think he could, just because he's seen what it takes to lead a team now. And these next 2 years with LeBron will be a huge stepping stone for him, because I think, like we said, Anthony Davis is probably one of the best bigs in the league, if not the best. He's the most skilled by far. So I think he's going to be able to get to that point where he can lead a team. But it's going to be tough, because once you go from playing with LeBron to not playing with LeBron, we've seen what his past teammates have done. Kevin Love is stuck in Cleveland. Kyrie has bounced to 2 different teams now, and first one he was kind of ran out. And with the Nets, we don't know how that's going to be. His first season was poor, by all means, So is Anthony Davis going to end up like them, or is he going to try and thrive? It's going to be really interesting to see, though. What do you think, though?
I think the interesting thing about him is, as you mentioned, you look at teams without LeBron, like with LeBron, then after, they don't go anywhere. They're picking in the lottery, in rebuild mode at some point. I mean, you look at the Heat; they hit a rough patch after LeBron left. You look at the Cavs; they've been one of the worst teams in the league without LeBron. Both the first time he left and the second time he left. I think Anthony Davis can either do one of two things, like you mentioned. He can be like Kevin Love, like like Kyrie, like even Dwayne Wade to an extent, and kind of just like flatline, or he can be like Scottie Pippen. And I think I'm going to err on the side of him being like Scottie Pippen. When Jordan retired the first time for those 3 years, Scottie Pippen was the best player on the team, and he got the team to the playoffs. They didn't win the title any of those years, obviously, but he at least got them to the playoffs and still developed so that when Jordan came back, he was that much better. Now, obviously, in the case of Anthony Davis, his Jordan and LeBron wouldn't come back. I imagine when LeBron says he's done, he's done. I think just because of all the mileage, all of the time he spent, I don't see LeBron retiring and then coming back. Not like as a shot at Jordan for doing that. Jordan was in a different situation at that time. LeBron has played, like, I think Jordan at that time had only played like maybe 10 years and then retired, something like that.
Yeah.
LeBron would be playing 20 consecutive years. I don't see him retiring and then coming back to play more years. I don't. I think when LeBron is done, LeBron is done. I do think, though, to answer the question, I think Anthony Davis errs on the side of Pippen. I think he can get the Lakers to the playoffs, but I think it's very possible, though, and he would have to get another star to come to LA to get them back into the title picture. The other thing, too, is the roster as currently constructed is very deep. But when you have that much roster turnover, you need the chemistry. I think we saw that opening night. It wasn't a bad game by any means for the Lakers. The thing about the Clippers, and this will always be the case, and this is the reason why, in my opinion, I think they will always lose or be in tough situations where they might lose in games not against the Lakers. And we saw it in the bubble. The Clippers will always play up to the Lakers.
Exactly.
Whether it's the Lob City Clippers, whether it's like no matter who's on the roster, the Clippers have always played up to the Lakers because even at the Lakers' worst, the Lakers are still always somehow better than the Clippers. Obviously, you can the Lob City Clippers, and that would be the one exception because the Lakers were kind of dying off at that point in terms of Kobe being the only one left, not really having a team around him. But when you look at what the Clippers do, Paul George dropped 33. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
No one cares that Paul George dropped 33 outside of the Clippers organization and the Clippers fans because Paul George hasn't proved that he can drop 33 in a big-time game in the playoffs. Exactly. And if Paul George isn't going to drop 33 on the Lakers in the conference finals, then who cares that he dropped 33 on opening night, on ring night? Now, I mean, it's a little bit of justice because it's ring night, but I don't think anyone expected the Lakers to come out to this screeching start. They had 2 months of rest.
Yeah.
Like the Clippers had like 4. The teams that didn't make the bubble had like 9 or 10. And then you just stagger it down from there. The Lakers, like we said at the top, I expect it to be a slow start. I think the beauty about LeBron James and Lakers is when it matters, they're going to turn it on. They're going to be the number 1 seed in the West. There's no doubt about it. The Clippers have always played up to the Lakers. And I think we saw in the series against the the Mavericks, which if it weren't for Porzingis being ejected, they would have lost in the first round. Yeah. So they should be sending the refs thank you cards and Christmas cards, Christmas bonuses tomorrow, because if it weren't for that, they would have been out of the first round. And the context and the conversation around the Clippers would be much different. Now, it doesn't help that they blew a 3-1 lead in the second round to the Nuggets. Taking nothing away from the Nuggets, but you don't blow a 3-1 lead. It's just not what you do. When you are clearly the more superior team, you cannot blow a 3-1 lead. It's just you just can't do it. And they did it, and it also was terrible performances in games 5, 6, and 7 by both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, which led to the 3-1 lead being blown. all that to say, I don't care how the Clippers play against the Lakers, honestly. And I may be the only person that thinks that because, number one, the Lakers and the Clippers isn't a rivalry. LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard's not a rivalry. Like, both of those notions are just wrong because the Lakers have been like the Lakers have 17 banners. The Clippers have 0. I think that's where the rivalry conversation starts and ends. You can say in the same city and they play in the same building. That's fine. Like the Clippers haven't been to a conference championship game, let alone the NBA Finals. I don't want to hear anything about a rivalry there. Kawhi Leonard is just now entering his prime. LeBron has been in his prime for the last 10 to 12 years. Yeah. There's not a rivalry there either. So the Clippers are always going to play up to the Lakers, whether they win or lose. I'm more concerned about how they play against the Nuggets, the Mavericks, the Rockets, the Warriors, the other 14, the other 12, the other 13 teams in the conference, where you also have to beat them too, to be in a position to eventually beat the Lakers and make the finals. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't. It just doesn't. Like the Clippers, they are void of leadership. They are void of chemistry. They are void of any type of anything that will lead you to think they're a championship contending team. I don't understand how you could look at the Lakers, win a championship, get better, and still pick the Clippers to win this year's championship. Yeah. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand how like Skip Bayless and Marcellus Wiley and all those big name guys that like will never watch this, so I can get away with calling them out without any repercussions. Like I don't get how they can do that. It doesn't make any sense to me. The Lakers are clearly the best team in the league. The Clippers are barely a top 5 team in the league. Yeah, I said it. Yeah, top 5 team in the league. And that's my rants on the Clippers for today. I haven't rants on the Clippers in 2 months. That felt good. Felt real good.
Yeah, and I actually agree. You know, the Clippers haven't shown enough. And the thing I always like to point out is that Kawhi and Paul George never play well together. Kawhi was arguably, stat-wise, he looked good, 27 points, but he was 10 of 26. If it takes you 26 shots to get you 26, 27 points, it's not a good night. And unless they figure out how to play together, they're probably not going to be a good team. And they lost depth this year. Yeah, they added Serge, but I don't think it's enough. I don't think that they did enough to warrant them being picked.
Yeah, it's the Clippers will always be the case of like little brother. Like when you think of LA, you think of the Lakers, you think of the Dodgers, like you think of
you don't think of the Clippers.
You don't think of like when someone asks you to name a sports team in California, specific, like they're gonna say the Lakers, they'll say the Warriors, the 49ers, like they'll name all the teams. The team they won't name is the Clippers unless they're a Clippers fan. Like they're just they haven't reached that level. They haven't reached that level of prominence, despite the addition of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, where you think that that's a team that can win a championship. It's something's got to change. Kawhi Leonard's great on the court. He's not that much of a leader off the court, which means that Paul George has got to be the leader off the court. And it's hard to follow someone when they're hitting shots off the side of the backboard in a game 7 against a team you're supposed to have beaten in like in 4 or 5.
Yeah.
And you have LeBron waiting for you next round. And that was supposed to be the big, like that was supposed to be the climax of your season. You talked about it all season. You had Kawhi Leonard with his subtle shots. You had Paul George, Pat Bev telling Steph, I don't know who Pat Bev thinks he is. Yeah, Patrick Beverly telling Steph Curry, your time is up. Our time is now. Like he's John Cena or something. I don't know. But you got all that, and you don't even make it to the Lakers. Yeah. They beaten the Lakers twice on opening night. I'll give them that. Winning, as Shannon Sharp has so astutely put it the other day. Congratulations to the Clippers for being 2 times opening night champs. It doesn't mean anything, because while the Clippers are load managing their way through the regular season, trying to get to the playoffs, the Lakers are going to get to the playoffs, blow everyone out of the water, win another championship, and then do it again next year. There's no conversation with the Clippers. There's not. they leave a lot to be desired. I like that Ty Lue's the coach. I think Ty Lue can do a lot better with reining in all the egos and things like that. He's a championship coach. He's coached LeBron James, obviously won that championship with them in 2016. So you have that to look at. But it's the Clippers. Like, it's the Clippers. They don't even have a bench anymore. They don't really have a bench anymore. It's the Clippers. It's the Clippers.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, they literally lost their best bench piece in Montrez. Lou Williams is getting way older.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, they just don't have that it factor now.
Yeah.
I think they lost a lot of their spark.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to see them take a hit this season for sure.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be surprised if they are outside of the top 4 in the conference.
Yeah.
In fact, I will say this. If I was a betting guy, which sometimes I like to bet a pretty penny on like football games and stuff, like maybe $20. If I was a betting guy, I'm just trying to pull up the conference real quick. Looking at the Western Conference, I could honestly see the Clippers finishing in the bottom half of the standings. I expect the Lakers to be number 1. I could see the Mavericks finishing ahead of them, the Nuggets finishing ahead of them. I think it's possible the Rockets could finish ahead of them.
Blazers.
The Blazers, especially the Blazers, I think the Blazers championship window is starting to open. It's not open all the way, obviously, because you still have LeBron. I think it's starting to open. I think obviously you're not going to have Carmelo much longer. So there's that. But Damian Lillard, in my opinion, is the best point guard in the league. Obviously, there's Steph Curry, who I think is the only other point guard in the league that has a claim to number 1 in terms of being the best number 1 in the league. But I think Damian Lillard is the best point guard in the league. He's starting to get the pieces around him to build a championship team. We saw them make it to the conference finals just 2 years ago. So it's not like they're devoid of talent. You've got Nurkic coming back. Obviously, Kanter has returned. So we're really looking at the team from 2 years ago that took the Warriors they got swept by the Warriors in the conference finals, but looking at a team that took the Nuggets to 7, from 2 years ago. It's really the exact same team with the addition of Carmelo Anthony. I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at the Blazers in the top 4, seeds in the conference this year as a serious threat to the Lakers. I don't know how much of a threat they will be perceived as the season progresses, but I think it's possible that the Blazers could pose a serious threat to that because of Damian Lillard is kind of like Patrick Mahomes in a way that he's always going to keep his team in it, right? Patrick Mahomes to it, it's different because Patrick Mahomes is the best player on the best team in football. Damian Lillard is the best player on like a middle of the pack team in the league, obviously, but if there's a chance that Damian Lillard can propel the Blazers to a victory, you can't sleep on the Blazers until 0-0, because even at 0-0, if the ball's in his hands, he's going to put up a shot, and we've seen he's probably going to make it. So I look at the Blazers and I say the championship window isn't open right now, but it's definitely opening.
Yeah.
It is definitely opening, and I think if they continue this upward ascension, I think they'll kick the door down in terms of being a championship contender once LeBron is gone, whether that's in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is. I think as LeBron gets older and as it becomes more of AD's team, I think that's really when the championship window opens for the Blazers 100%. Of course, you have the Warriors, who will be, coming back next season looking for a title, obviously. Yeah. Barring another catastrophic injury. It's Klay Thompson's luck as of late hasn't really been the best. It's really
unfortunately.
Turning the ACL, coming back, getting revved up for the season. Everyone's like, oh yeah, the Warriors are going to be a title contender. And then he tears the Achilles. I will say this though, if Kevin Durant is any indication, Kevin Durant is
going to come back strong.
He's going to come back strong. The other thing too is Kevin Durant's much more athletic than Klay Thompson is. So Kevin Durant's Achilles is much more likely to tear again because he's dunking it. He's driving with it, doing all that other stuff. Klay Thompson's just running around, catching the ball and shooting. Not that that's a bad thing, but like when you take away the athletic standpoint and the wear and tear on it, it makes it more likely that he can come back and come back strong. I like the Warriors' chances of being a title contender next year. I wouldn't be surprised if they win the title next year, honestly.
Yeah.
I think they'll pose the biggest threat to the Lakers next year. I don't want to hear anything about the Clippers.
Well, especially taking into account they keep their Minnesota pick, assuming that's a top 5 pick.
Absolutely.
You get a guy like Jalen Johnson, or for some reason maybe Cade Cunningham. Like, this is a good draft.
And I would say the other thing too is I expect the Warriors to be in the playoffs as like a 7 or 8. I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors miss the playoffs and are picking in the top half of the draft. Like, it wouldn't shock me at all if they're in another situation. I don't expect them to be top 10 again, or top 3. I don't expect them to be in the lottery. I think they could be in that in that 12 to 15 range. But we've seen 12 to 15 is still there's
really
nothing
good.
wrong with there's nothing wrong with 12 to 15. So
Donovan Mitchell was picked in around 11, I believe. So
right. And like you said, they still have the Timberwolves pick. So if they, which I mean, they're obviously probably going to be a playoff team, but if they're not, and they have like a 12 to 15 and a top 3 pick or a top 5 pick, that's a really good draft for the Warriors.
And you could easily package that for another player or a higher draft pick.
Absolutely.
There's a lot you could do.
And the beauty of the Warriors is we've seen that they can develop talent. Case in point, Steph Curry. Case in point, Draymond Green. Case in point,
Klay Thompson.
They can develop the talent. I expect them to do the same with James Wiseman. I expect them to do the same next season with whoever they draft. So developing talent is not a question you have with the Warriors like you have with the Rockets, for example. So I look at the Warriors and I'm saying the championship window very much open. Like we discussed the last time we were together, I don't really think the dynasty is over. It's the same group of people. You look at 2019, they would have won the title if it weren't for the injuries. I think everybody knows that. I think everybody knows if KD doesn't go down with the Achilles twice, which is really weird to like kind of like rupture it and then tear it. That's really weird to like have this.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's what happens when you get rushed back. Like you have all the injuries. Of course, you're going to lose to the finals in the finals to a team that is at full strength and riding a wave of momentum. And it was a pretty good team at the time. So if you take that away, they win that title in 2019. They probably would have lost in 2020, even if they were at full strength. It would have been close though. So you're looking at like 4 titles in 6 years. And then this, like, that's still a dynasty in my opinion. Championship window very much open. I think it's closing for sure because of the ascension of all these other teams, but it's definitely still open. The last thing I want to say, and I know we talked about this before, if you had to pick right now, and I know it's only been in one game, if you had to pick right now, who do you expect is going to be the MVP of when it's all said and done this season? Who are you looking at as your MVP candidate?
I said this in mine a little bit ago, but I'm going to stick to my guns. I'm going to stick with Steph. On a team that has no other stars, I guess you could say. He's going to be the one that I think stepped up the most. And that's also taking into account, like, these guys are fresh, Yeah. The Warriors haven't played a competitive game since that finals back in 2019. So there's no question that they're going to be healthy fresh at least. And I think Steph is just a guy you can't count out, So I believe in him, and I'm hoping that he plays well. He's on my fantasy team, so he better. But, what do you think?
Like I said the other day, I think it's going to be Luka.
Yeah, that's a good choice too.
I saw Kevin Durant, and when you tear your Achilles, the question is always, will you come back to be at least 70% of what you once were?
Yeah.
You can ask the Seattle Storm and the WNBA. Clearly, it is possible. We saw Breonna Stewart do it. They won the championship. I looked at KD, and it's only been one game, and so we have to see just the wear and tear of that Achilles as the season progresses, as it continues to be used and worked on and things like that. I think it is very possible that Kevin Durant is in the conversation for MVP this season if he continues to play the way he was playing. on opening night. It's only been one game, I understand it. But, I mean, he stepped back on the court and he's dropping buckets as if he never left.
Yeah.
Like if he's been playing the game for the last year or year and a half. So when I look at it from that regard, I mean, obviously I'm still going to go with Luka Doncic, but I got to say Kevin Durant is a very close second in my mind. I agree with you. I think Steph Curry is going to be in the conversation. I think it's possible that we can get Damian Lillard in the conversation. And I think this would be the first time he's a serious consideration for MVP in his career. Anthony Davis is a name that pops in my mind. And of course, even though I don't think it'll be consistent, you can never go wrong with putting some money on LeBron to win an MVP. I think a dark horse, I think someone that no one's really considering. I think it is possible that Jason Tatum can creep into the conversation because he's continuing to show that he's a bona fide star in the league. I don't think he will, though. I don't think he'll crack into the top 5. But my pick as it stands right now is Luka Doncic. I'm going to stick with that. But I think halfway through the season, around the trade deadline, I think it's possible that Kevin Durant could be leading MVP conversations if he continues to play the way we expect him to play, which is how he was playing before he went down with that Achilles injury. Yeah, Kevin Durant. You turn on the TV and it's like he's playing like he's been playing for the last. Like it's just insane. You wouldn't have thought he was coming off of an Achilles tear. Like
if you told me he was, I'd be like, no,
right. That guy coming off an Achilles. No way is that guy coming off an Achilles. He just didn't look like it at no point did he look like he was coming off an Achilles in that game. It's only been one game, but I like Luka Doncic for MVP. I do. I think this first month without Kristaps will be a good sign of that too, because he'll be playing by himself. So I think, if I had to rank it right now, I'd say Luka, AD, Steph, AD, and Dame are my top 5 in terms of MVP candidates right now. It's always going to change because there's always something in the NBA. It's never something. Before we go, do you have any last thoughts? Obviously, Christmas is tomorrow, so there's some big games on tap tomorrow. Do you have any last thoughts about, the Warriors, the Rockets, Lakers, anything before we go?
I'm a bit scared for tomorrow. No Draymond, so we'll see what happens. But, Merry Christmas to you, man.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Merry Christmas to you. Like I've said several times in the past, talking basketball with you is always fun.
Definitely, man.
I didn't expect it to be such a quick turnaround for you coming back, but I can't wait to have you back on again, whether it's like 3 days from now or 3 weeks from now. It's always good talking basketball with you. Again, if you haven't already subscribed or checked out any of Spencer's content over on his YouTube channel or Instagram, be sure to head over to go on YouTube, head over to his channel, Full Court Talk, or follow him on Instagram at Full Court Talk, and check out his content there. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, click the notification bell for any more of our content over here on Go Talk Podcast. Be on the lookout for new content as well. Merry Christmas to you all. And I guess Happy New Year as well. Well, I should say Happy Holidays, because there might be some people that don't celebrate Christmas. Again, Spencer, thank you for coming on and talking basketball with me. It's always a pleasure. And again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and as always, this episode was powered by PodDecks, and you guys enjoy the rest of your lives.